They snickered behind her back as she walked through the gleaming corridors of Metropolitan Emergency Services headquarters, her faded blue uniform a stark contrast to the crisp, high-tech gear worn by everyone else. The fabric had seen better days, with patches that told stories of countless emergency calls, and a style that belonged to a different era of rescue operations. But when a catastrophic blizzard trapped an entire school bus full of children into rain that no modern aircraft could reach, Captain Rebecca "Becky" Harrison and her supposedly obsolete equipment became the only hope standing between life and death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning fog hung thick over Cascade Valley Regional Airport as Captain Rebecca Harrison adjusted the worn leather strap of her flight helmet. At 42, she had been flying for the Coast Guard Auxiliary for nearly 20 years, but you wouldn't know it from the way her colleagues treated her. Her uniform told a different story than the sleek, modern flight suits worn by the younger pilots around her. The faded blue fabric bore the insignia of the old Auxiliary Search and Rescue Division, a program that had been officially modernized 5 years ago when the service transitioned to what administrators called contemporary emergency response protocols. Rebecca's uniform hadn't been updated because, technically, she wasn't supposed to need one. Her assignment to the Auxiliary's vintage aircraft maintenance program was considered a placeholder position, something to keep an experienced pilot busy while the organization figured out what to do with someone whose skills had supposedly been made obsolete by technological advancement. The brass had been clear about their vision for the future: sleek helicopters equipped with thermal imaging, GPS navigation systems, and computerized flight controls operated by pilots trained on the latest simulation technology. The hangar that housed Rebecca's aircraft stood at the far end of the airfield, separated from the main operations by a chain-link fence that seemed to emphasize the distance between old and new approaches to emergency response. Inside the weathered building sat her charge, a 1987 Bell UH-1H Huey helicopter that the younger pilots referred to as the museum piece when they thought she couldn't hear them. The aircraft had been scheduled for decommissioning 3 times in the past decade, but bureaucratic delays and budget constraints had kept it in limited service for what officials euphemistically called specialized training purposes. Rebecca knew every rivet and wire in that helicopter. She had personally overseen its maintenance for the past 8 years, learning its quirks and capabilities in a way that no computer manual could teach. The Huey was loud, mechanically complex, and required a level of hands-on piloting that modern aviators found antiquated. It lacked the sophisticated avionics of newer aircraft, relying instead on analog instruments and pilot intuition for navigation and flight control. Most importantly, it had been designed for a different era of military and rescue operations, when missions required aircraft that could operate in austere conditions without the support infrastructure that contemporary helicopters demanded. The morning briefing took place in the main operations center, a gleaming facility filled with wall-mounted displays showing weather patterns, flight tracking data, and emergency response protocols. Rebecca took her usual seat in the back row, her faded uniform making her nearly invisible among the 30 other personnel dressed in crisp, navy blue flight suits with reflective strips and modern insignia. The contrast was intentional, she suspected. The old guard needed to be reminded of their place in the hierarchy of progress. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, the region's operations director, stood before a large digital map displaying current weather conditions across the Pacific Northwest. At 34, Walsh represented everything the modern Coast Guard Auxiliary valued: advanced degrees in emergency management and aviation science, certification on multiple aircraft platforms, and a philosophy that emphasized technology-driven solutions to rescue challenges. She wore her authority with the confidence of someone who had never been forced to question whether her methods were adequate for the situations she might encounter. "We're tracking a significant weather system moving in from the Pacific," Walsh announced, her laser pointer highlighting bands of precipitation that stretched across 3 states. Current projections show heavy snow and high winds developing throughout the Cascade region over the next 48 hours. All units should prepare for possible SIR operations if conditions deteriorate beyond civilian preparedness levels. Rebecca studied the weather data with the practiced eye of someone who had flown rescue missions in similar conditions countless times. The storm pattern looked familiar, the kind of system that could transform routine winter weather into life-threatening emergencies for anyone caught unprepared in the mountains. She had seen storms like this before, back when the auxiliary operated under different protocols and with different equipment priorities. "Harrison," Walsh called out, not bothering to look in Rebecca's direction. "You'll be on standby for equipment. Transport if we need to stage additional supplies at remote locations. The Huey should be adequate for moving cargo to areas where ground vehicles can take over. Equipment transport." It was a polite way of saying that Rebecca and her aircraft were considered too outdated for actual rescue operations, suitable only for the kind of support roles that kept vintage equipment technically operational without trusting it with missions that mattered. The assignment stung, but Rebecca had learned not to respond to these casual dismissals. Arguing would only reinforce the perception that she was a relic clinging to obsolete methods. Captain James Mitchell, the region's senior pilot, raised his hand from the front row. At 29, Mitchell flew the newest helicopter in the fleet, a state-of-the-art Eurocopter, EC-135, equipped with every modern rescue technology available. His flight suit bore patches indicating certification on 6 different aircraft types and completion of advanced rescue training programs that emphasized technological solutions to emergency situations. "Ma'am, what's our protocol if we encounter conditions that exceed the operational parameters of our primary aircraft?" Mitchell asked. "The new birds are incredible in most situations, but they do have some limitations in extreme weather." It was a reasonable question from a pilot who understood his equipment's capabilities and limitations. The modern helicopters were marvels of engineering, but they had been designed for efficiency and technological sophistication rather than the kind of rugged versatility that characterized older aircraft. Their computerized systems could fail. In extreme conditions, their lightweight construction made them vulnerable to severe turbulence, and their complex maintenance requirements meant they couldn't operate for extended periods without specialized support. Walsh consulted her tablet before responding. "Current doctrine emphasizes coordination with other agencies when conditions exceed our operational envelope. The National Guard has heavy lift capability, and civilian contractors can provide specialized equipment when needed." Rebecca almost smiled at the diplomatic language. What Walsh was really saying was that if the modern aircraft couldn't handle a mission, they would call someone else to do it. The possibility that their own organization possessed equipment capable of operating in challenging conditions apparently wasn't worth considering, especially if that equipment happened to be operated by someone wearing an outdated uniform. The briefing continued with discussions of communication protocols, medical evacuation procedures, and interagency coordination requirements. Rebecca listened with half her attention while studying the weather data more carefully. The storm system showed characteristics that reminded her of several challenging rescues from her earlier career, missions that had required aircraft capable of operating in conditions that would ground more sophisticated equipment. As the meeting concluded and personnel began filing out to prepare their aircraft, Rebecca overheard a conversation between Mitchell and 2 other pilots that crystallized everything she had been thinking about the organization's direction. "I don't understand why they keep that old bird operational," said Lieutenant Kevin Ross, a recent Academy graduate who flew one of the newer rescue helicopters. The maintenance costs alone must be ridiculous, and it's not like Harrison is going to be leading any real missions. Mitchell nodded in agreement. Walsh told me they're planning to finally decommission it next year once the budget gets approved for another EC-135. Harrison will probably get reassigned to training or administration. About time, added Lieutenant Dana Cooper, the youngest pilot on the team. My grandmother probably flew aircraft like that. It's embarrassing to have museum pieces sitting on the same flight line as our operational birds. Rebecca gathered her paperwork and headed toward the exit, her expression carefully neutral despite the familiar sting of being dismissed by colleagues who had never flown anything more challenging than training exercises in perfect weather. She had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times over the past 5 years, as the organization gradually shifted away from the philosophy that had originally attracted her to rescue work. The walk back to her hangar took her past the main flight line, where ground crews were preparing the modern aircraft for potential operations. The newer helicopters gleamed in the morning sun, their sleek lines and sophisticated equipment representing millions of dollars in taxpayer investment. They were impressive machines, Rebecca had to admit, capable of remarkable performance when operated within their design parameters. The contrast with her own aircraft couldn't have been more stark. The Huey sat in its weathered hangar like a veteran warrior put out to pasture, its angular lines and utilitarian design reflecting a different philosophy of aviation. Worthy. Modern helicopters emphasized computerized systems and technological sophistication. The older aircraft prioritized mechanical reliability and pilot skill. It had been built during an era when rescue operations were expected to succeed regardless of conditions, when equipment failure wasn't an acceptable excuse for mission abortion. Rebecca began her daily inspection routine, running her hands along the aircraft's skin and checking systems that had been designed to operate in environments that would challenge even the most capable modern equipment. The Huey's twin-engine configuration provided redundancy that single-engine aircraft couldn't match, while its robust construction had been proven in combat operations that made civilian rescue work seem routine by comparison. Staff Sergeant Tom Bradley, the hangar's maintenance chief, emerged from behind the aircraft, carrying a clipboard filled with inspection forms. At 57, Bradley had been working on helicopters since before Rebecca started flying, and he understood the Huey's capabilities better than anyone else on the base. His civilian contractor status meant he didn't wear a uniform at all, but his expertise commanded respect from anyone knowledgeable enough to appreciate it. "She's ready to go if you need her," Bradley said, patting the aircraft's side with obvious affection. "New transmission filters, fresh hydraulic fluid, and I replaced those worn cable assemblies we've been watching." "Thanks, Tom," Rebecca replied, reviewing the maintenance log with the same attention she gave to pre-flight inspections. "The weather's supposed to get interesting over the next couple of days. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." Bradley glanced toward the main operations building, where the sleek modern helicopters were being prepared for potential missions. Interesting enough that they might need something built for rough conditions instead of perfect weather. It was as close as the veteran mechanic would come to criticizing official policy, but Rebecca understood his meaning. The modern aircraft were remarkable machines when operated within their design specifications, but those specifications assumed a level of support and environmental control that wasn't always available during actual emergencies. The radio in the hangar crackled with routine traffic as rescue units across the region reported their readiness status. Rebecca listened with the practiced ear of someone who had spent decades interpreting the subtle cues that indicated how prepared an organization really was for the challenges it might face. The voices were confident and professional, but they carried the slight tension that came from relying on equipment that had never been tested under truly challenging conditions. As she completed her inspection and updated the aircraft's logbooks, Rebecca found herself thinking about the nature of progress and institutional change. The Coast Guard Auxiliary's modernization efforts had brought undeniable improvements in many areas: better communication systems, more precise navigation equipment, and enhanced medical capabilities that could save lives in ways that older technology couldn't match. But the focus on technological sophistication had also created vulnerabilities that weren't always apparent until conditions exceeded the parameters that modern equipment had been designed to handle. The storm system approaching from the Pacific represented exactly the kind of challenge that could reveal those vulnerabilities. Weather didn't respect the operational limitations of sophisticated aircraft, and emergencies had a way of occurring in places and conditions that defied the assumptions built into modern rescue protocols. Rebecca closed the maintenance log and secured the hangar, knowing that her role in whatever developed over the next few days would likely be limited to support functions. That kept her safely away from any real challenges. The organization had made its priorities clear. Modern equipment operated by young pilots represented the future, while older aircraft and experienced aviators were relics to be tolerated until they could be gracefully retired. But storms had a way of changing priorities, and the weather system building over the Pacific looked like it might be the kind that reminded everyone why some capabilities were worth preserving, regardless of how outdated they might appear to those who had never needed them. The Coast Guard Auxiliary's transformation into a high-tech rescue organization had been 5 years in the making, driven by congressional mandates for modernization and efficiency that promised to revolutionize emergency response capabilities. The gleaming new headquarters building housed a command center that looked more like a NASA mission control facility than a traditional rescue coordination office, with dozens of workstations equipped with multiple monitors displaying real-time weather data, aircraft positions, and emergency communications from across the Pacific Northwest. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh had been instrumental in designing the new operational philosophy that emphasized technological solutions over traditional rescue methods. Her office walls displayed framed certificates from advanced training programs, including specialized courses in aviation meteorology, emergency management systems, and multi-agency coordination protocols. The centerpiece was her master's degree in emergency response technology from a prestigious university that had pioneered the academic study of disaster management. The modern approach to rescue operations relied heavily on predictive modeling and risk assessment algorithms that could theoretically identify potential emergencies before they became critical. Sophisticated weather tracking systems provided minute-by-minute updates on conditions across the region, while GPS technology allowed precise navigation to emergency sites with accuracy that older pilots could never achieve through traditional methods. The fleet of new aircraft represented the cutting edge of civilian rescue technology. The Eurocopter EC-135 helicopters featured glass cockpits with digital displays that provided pilots with comprehensive flight information, automatic navigation, systems that could guide aircraft to emergency sites without requiring extensive local knowledge, and advanced communication equipment that maintained constant contact with base operations. Each aircraft cost nearly $3 million and required specialized training that took months to complete. Captain James Mitchell had been selected as the test pilot for the modernization program, based on his academic credentials and adaptability to new technology. His background included an aerospace engineering degree and completion of civilian flight training programs that emphasized systematic approaches to emergency response. Unlike older pilots who relied on experience and intuition, Mitchell had been trained to trust his instruments and follow established procedures that had been developed through careful analysis of rescue scenarios. The new operational doctrine emphasized safety margins and risk mitigation strategies that prioritized crew survival over mission completion rates. Modern aircraft were equipped with multiple backup systems and automated safety features that could prevent pilot error and equipment failure, while standardized procedures ensured that all rescue operations followed proven protocols that minimized the possibility of accidents. Training programs focused on technology integration and systems management rather than the hands-on flying skills that had characterized earlier generations of rescue pilots. Simulators provided realistic training scenarios without the risks associated with actual flight experience, while computer-based instruction modules taught decision-making processes that emphasized logical analysis over instinctive responses to emergency situations. The maintenance philosophy had also evolved to embrace predictive maintenance schedules and computerized diagnostic systems that could identify potential problems before they caused aircraft failures. Modern helicopters featured built-in monitoring systems that transmitted performance data to ground-based maintenance facilities, allowing technicians to track component wear and schedule replacements based on mathematical models rather than visual inspections and mechanical intuition. Regional emergency response protocols had been redesigned to integrate with state and federal agencies through standardized communication systems and coordinated command structures. The new approach emphasized interagency cooperation and resource sharing, with the assumption that complex rescue operations would involve multiple organizations working together through established chains of command and predetermined responsibilities. Lieutenant Kevin Ross exemplified the new generation of rescue pilots, having completed his training entirely on modern equipment and procedures. His educational background included courses in emergency psychology, resource management, and technological systems integration that prepared him for the complex decision-making environment of contemporary rescue operations. Unlike pilots from previous generations who had learned through trial and error in actual emergency situations, Ross had been trained through systematic instruction and simulation-based scenarios. The command center's daily operations briefing represented the pinnacle of modern emergency response coordination. Multiple screens displayed weather patterns, air traffic information, and resource availability across the region, while specialized software analyzed historical data to predict where emergencies were most likely to occur. The briefing format followed standardized procedures that ensured all relevant information was communicated efficiently to personnel who needed to understand current conditions and operational priorities. Weather monitoring systems provided unprecedented detail about atmospheric conditions, with satellite imagery and computer models that could predict storm development hours or even days in advance. The technology allowed operations planners to position resources strategically and adjust staffing levels based on anticipated emergency response requirements, theoretically eliminating the surprises that had complicated rescue operations in earlier eras. Aircraft scheduling and crew assignments were managed through sophisticated database systems that tracked pilot qualifications, aircraft availability, and maintenance schedules to optimize resource utilization. The computerized approach eliminated the informal coordination methods that had previously relied on personal relationships and individual initiative, replacing them with systematic processes that could be monitored and evaluated for efficiency. Modern rescue philosophy emphasized measured responses and calculated risk assessment that prioritized the safety of rescue personnel while maintaining professional service to civilians in distress. Standard operating procedures covered virtually every conceivable emergency scenario, with detailed checklists and decision trees that guided pilot actions through structured responses to specific situations. Lieutenant Donna Cooper represented the latest evolution in rescue pilot training, having completed her certification through accelerated programs that compressed traditional flight training into intensive courses focused on specific aircraft systems and emergency procedures. Her academic preparation included specialized courses in human factors engineering and crew resource management that taught Systematic approaches to decision-making under stress. The fleet's maintenance program utilized computerized diagnostic systems and predictive maintenance schedules that eliminated much of the uncertainty that had characterized older aircraft maintenance practices. Scheduled component replacements were based on mathematical models that calculated optimal replacement intervals, while computerized systems monitored aircraft performance in real time to identify potential problems before they could cause mission failures. Communication systems had been upgraded to provide seamless coordination between aircraft, ground facilities, and other emergency response agencies. Digital radios with encrypted channels ensured secure communications, while satellite communication systems provided backup connectivity that eliminated the dead zones that had complicated coordination in mountainous terrain. During earlier rescue operations, the new operational tempo reflected the efficiency gains promised by technological modernization. Missions could be planned and executed more quickly than ever before, with computer-assisted navigation eliminating much of the time previously required for route planning and weather analysis. Automated systems handled many of the routine tasks that had previously required constant pilot attention, theoretically freeing crews to focus on the complex, decision-making aspects of rescue operations. Standard operating procedures covered every aspect of rescue operations, from initial emergency notification through final mission completion reports. The systematic approach eliminated the improvisation that had characterized earlier rescue methods, replacing individual initiative with proven procedures that had been tested through simulation and analysis. Training standards emphasized technological proficiency and systematic decision-making over the intuitive flying skills that had defined previous generations of rescue pilots. Modern pilots were expected to trust their instruments and follow established procedures rather than relying on experience-based judgment that was considered unreliable and potentially dangerous. The modernization program had achieved remarkable success in terms of operational efficiency and safety statistics. Mission completion rates had improved, crew safety records showed significant enhancement, and coordination with other agencies had become more seamless through standardized communication protocols and shared operational procedures. Quality assurance programs monitored every aspect of rescue operations through detailed data collection and analysis systems that identified areas for improvement and ensured compliance with established standards. Performance metrics tracked response times, success rates, and resource utilization to provide objective measures of organizational effectiveness. The administrative structure supporting modern rescue operations included specialized personnel trained in emergency management, logistics coordination, and interagency communication. The professional approach eliminated much of the informal coordination that had previously relied on personal relationships and individual initiative, replacing it with systematic processes that could be documented and evaluated. Captain Mitchell's role as senior pilot included responsibility for training standardization and procedure development that ensured all personnel operated according to established protocols. His systematic approach to pilot development emphasized technological proficiency and adherence to proven methods rather than the experiential learning that had characterized earlier training programs. The success of the modernization program was evident in the organization's enhanced reputation among emergency response agencies and the increased funding that supported continued technological advancement. The systematic approach to rescue operations had eliminated many of the uncertainties and inefficiencies that had complicated earlier emergency response efforts, while the emphasis on safety and procedure compliance had virtually eliminated the accidents and equipment failures that had previously threatened both rescue personnel and the civilians they served. However, the approaching storm system represented exactly the kind of challenge that would test whether technological sophistication could fully replace the experience-based capabilities that modern procedures had been designed to supersede. Weather patterns that exceeded the parameters built into computer models, terrain that challenged the limitations of sophisticated aircraft, and emergency scenarios that fell outside the boundaries of established procedures would reveal whether the new approach possessed the flexibility and resilience needed to handle situations that couldn't be anticipated through systematic analysis and technological preparation. The first emergency call came in at 11:47 a.m. on Tuesday, just as the leading edge of the Pacific storm system began to impact the Cascade foothills. A family of 4 hikers had become disoriented in rapidly deteriorating weather conditions near Thornton Ridge, a popular trail system that normally offered spectacular views but had become treacherous as visibility dropped to near zero in the sudden onset of heavy snow and high winds. The emergency dispatch center received the distress call from a cellular phone with a weak signal that cut in and out as the caller struggled to provide location information. The GPS coordinates extracted from the phone's emergency beacon placed the stranded hikers approximately 2 miles from the nearest road access point, in terrain that was challenging even under ideal conditions, but had become genuinely dangerous. As the storm intensified beyond Weather Service predictions, Lieutenant Commander Walsh activated the standard response protocol from the gleaming command center, her fingers moving efficiently across multiple computer screens as she accessed weather data, aircraft availability status, and pilot assignment schedules. The sophisticated emergency management system displayed real-time information about wind speeds, visibility conditions, and precipitation rates that painted a concerning picture of rapidly worsening conditions throughout the search area. Captain Mitchell was assigned as primary pilot for the rescue mission, with Lieutenant Ross designated as his co-pilot and crew chief. Their aircraft, Rescue 47, was one of the newest EC-135 helicopters in the fleet, equipped with state-of-the-art navigation systems and thermal imaging equipment that should have made locating the stranded hikers relatively straightforward despite the challenging weather conditions. The pre-flight briefing took place in the computerized planning room, where large monitors displayed topographical maps, overlaid with real-time weather information and optimal flight routes calculated by navigation software. The mission profile appeared routine based on the data, a standard search and rescue operation in familiar terrain using proven aircraft and established procedures that had been successful in dozens of similar situations. Mitchell reviewed the flight plan with characteristic thoroughness, his systematic approach reflecting the training that emphasized careful preparation and adherence to established protocols. The route to Thornton Ridge followed standard corridors that provided maximum safety margins while minimizing exposure to the worst weather conditions. Computer-generated altitude recommendations and approach vectors took into account wind patterns and visibility limitations to ensure the safest possible mission profile. The weather briefing provided detailed atmospheric data that showed the storm system intensifying more rapidly than initial forecasts had predicted. Wind speeds were approaching the upper limits of the EC-135's operational envelope, while visibility conditions were deteriorating toward minimums that would challenge even the most sophisticated navigation equipment. The meteorology specialist recommended proceeding with caution and maintaining constant communication with base operations throughout the mission. Rescue 47 lifted off from Cascade Valley Regional Airport at 12:23 p.m., its sleek profile cutting through air that was already beginning to show the effects of the approaching storm. Mitchell's flying was textbook perfect, following instrument procedures with precision while monitoring the aircraft's sophisticated systems for any indication of developing problems. The initial phase of the flight proceeded smoothly, with all systems functioning normally and communication remaining clear with base operations. The first indication of trouble came as the helicopter approached the foothills, where the interaction between the storm system and mountainous terrain was creating wind conditions that exceeded the computer model's predictions. The EC-135 began experiencing turbulence that forced Mitchell to adjust his approach route and reduce airspeed to maintain control, while the aircraft's computerized systems began registering stress levels that approached operational limits. "Base, this is Rescue 47, Mitchell transmitted, his voice maintaining professional calm despite the increasing difficulty of maintaining stable flight. "We're encountering wind conditions that are significantly worse than brief. The aircraft is handling it, but we're at the edge of operational parameters." Walsh monitored the mission from the command center, where multiple screens displayed the helicopter's position, performance data, and atmospheric conditions in real time. The sophisticated tracking systems provided unprecedented detail about the aircraft's status, but they also revealed that conditions were deteriorating faster than anyone had anticipated. The computer models that had seemed so precise during mission planning were proving inadequate for the rapidly changing reality of mountain weather. As Rescue 47 reached the general area where the hikers were believed to be located, the thermal imaging equipment that should have made finding them straightforward began experiencing interference from the heavy snow and wind. The sophisticated sensors were designed for optimal performance under controlled conditions, but the chaotic atmospheric environment was overwhelming their ability to distinguish between human heat signatures and the thermal variations created by the storm itself. Mitchell attempted multiple search patterns, following procedures that had been proven effective in training scenarios and previous missions. But the combination of deteriorating visibility, increasing turbulence, and equipment limitations that hadn't been apparent during fair weather operations was making the search far more difficult than anyone had expected. The hikers remained invisible despite systematic coverage of the area where they were supposed to be located. "We're not getting any clear thermal signatures," Ross reported from his position at the sensor console. "The snow is creating too much interference, and the wind is making it impossible to maintain steady observation angles." The situation was becoming increasingly frustrating for a crew that had been trained to rely on technological solutions for search and rescue challenges. The equipment that had performed flawlessly during training exercises was proving inadequate for the harsh realities of actual emergency conditions, while the systematic procedures that had seemed so comprehensive were revealing gaps that hadn't been apparent in controlled environments. Lieutenant Cooper, monitoring the mission from the operations center, suggested adjusting the search pattern to account for the equipment limitations they were encountering. Her recommendation involved lower altitude flying that would bring the thermal sensors closer to potential targets, but would also expose the aircraft to more severe turbulence and reduce safety margins that were already being compressed by the worsening conditions. Mitchell attempted the modified search approach, but the EC-135's sophisticated flight control systems began registering multiple warnings as the aircraft encountered wind shears and downdrafts that pushed its operational envelope beyond designed limits. The computerized safety systems that were intended to prevent pilot error were now actively limiting his ability to maneuver effectively in the challenging conditions. "Base, we're getting multiple system warnings," Mitchell reported, his frustration evident despite his professional training. "The aircraft is trying to protect itself, but that's preventing us from getting low enough to conduct an effective search." Back at the hangar, Rebecca had been monitoring the radio traffic. While conducting routine maintenance on the Huey, she understood immediately what was happening based on her extensive experience with mountain rescue operations in challenging weather. The modern aircraft was encountering exactly the kind of conditions that revealed the limitations of technology-dependent systems, while the search crew was discovering that sophisticated equipment couldn't compensate for the fundamental realities of severe weather flying. The frustration in Mitchell's voice triggered memories of her own early experiences with difficult rescues, when she had learned that successful mountain flying required adaptability and intuition that couldn't be programmed into computers or taught through simulation training. The EC-135 was a remarkable aircraft, but it had been designed for efficiency and sophistication rather than the kind of rugged versatility needed for operations in truly challenging conditions. Staff Sergeant Bradley looked up from his maintenance work as the radio chatter became increasingly tense. "Sounds like they're having trouble up there," he observed, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen countless similar situations over the years. Rebecca nodded, studying the weather radar display. That showed the storm system continuing to intensify beyond all predictions. The new birds are amazing when conditions are within their operational parameters, but mountains don't care about operational parameters. The search mission continued for another 30 minutes, with Rescue 47 making repeated attempts to locate the stranded hikers despite deteriorating conditions and equipment limitations that were making the task increasingly difficult. Mitchell's skill as a pilot was evident in his ability to maintain control of the aircraft under challenging circumstances, but the systematic approach that had been so effective during training was proving inadequate for the unpredictable realities of actual emergency operations. Finally, with fuel levels declining and weather conditions continuing to worsen, Walsh made the decision to recall Rescue 47 to base. The mission had failed to locate the stranded hikers, who remained somewhere in the mountains as conditions deteriorated toward levels that would soon make any rescue attempt impossible. "All stations, this is base," Walsh transmitted with obvious reluctance. "Rescue 47 is ordered to return to base immediately. We'll reassess the situation and coordinate with ground teams for alternative rescue methods." Point where instrument flying was the only option. The sophisticated navigation systems that had seemed so reliable during fair weather were being tested to their limits by conditions that pushed every system aboard the aircraft beyond its design. Operating envelope. As Rescue 47 approached the airport for landing, Rebecca watched from her hangar and understood exactly what had happened. The modern aircraft and its highly trained crew had encountered the kind of situation that revealed the difference between technological sophistication and operational capability. The hikers were still out there, their situation becoming more desperate with each passing hour, while the organization's primary rescue assets had been defeated by conditions that were challenging but not impossible for aircraft designed to handle them. The failed mission created an uncomfortable silence in the operations center as personnel tried to process what had just occurred. The technological systems that had promised to revolutionize rescue operations had proved inadequate when confronted with the harsh realities of mountain weather, while the systematic procedures that had seemed so comprehensive had revealed significant gaps when applied to actual emergency conditions. Lieutenant Commander Walsh began coordinating with ground-based search teams and other agencies for alternative rescue methods, but everyone involved understood that the approaching storm was rapidly eliminating options for reaching the stranded hikers. Time was running out, and the organization's most capable aircraft had just demonstrated that technological sophistication couldn't guarantee mission success when conditions exceeded the parameters that modern systems had been designed to handle. Stage was now set for a much more serious challenge that would test not just the limits of technology, but the fundamental assumptions about what constituted effective emergency response capability in an era that had embraced sophistication over proven reliability. The emergency radio crackled to life at 3:17 p.m. with the kind of call that every rescue coordinator dreads. A school bus carrying 26 children from Riverside Elementary School had skidded off Highway 126 during a field trip return journey, sliding down a steep embankment and coming to rest against a grove of pine trees in terrain that was rapidly becoming inaccessible as the storm system unleashed its full fury across the Cascade region. The initial report from Oregon State police was fragmentary but alarming. The bus driver had managed to transmit a brief mayday call before losing radio contact. "Report, I need multiple injuries among the children," and stating that the vehicle was precariously positioned on an unstable slope that threatened to give way completely if disturbed by rescue vehicles or heavy equipment. The location was approximately 8 miles southeast of the town of Clearwater, in mountainous terrain that had become virtually impassable for ground-based rescue teams. Lieutenant Commander Walsh felt her stomach clench as the full scope of the emergency became clear. 26 children, ranging in age from 8 to 12, were trapped in a disabled school bus that could slide further down the mountainside at any moment. The weather conditions that had already defeated one rescue mission were continuing to worsen, with wind speeds now consistently exceeding 50 miles per hour and visibility reduced to less than a quarter mile in driving snow that showed no signs of diminishing. The state police helicopter that had been dispatched to assess the situation reported back within minutes, but the news was worse than anyone had hoped. The bus was indeed perched on an unstable slope, held in place only by the grove of trees that had prevented it from tumbling into a deep ravine below. Any significant vibration or disturbance could trigger a catastrophic slide that would send the vehicle and its young passengers plummeting hundreds of feet to certain death. Moreover, the terrain surrounding the crash site was too steep and unstable for ground teams to approach safely, while the weather conditions were creating whiteout visibility that made precise navigation nearly impossible. The state police pilot, a veteran with 20 years of mountain flying experience, declared the site inaccessible to conventional rescue aircraft, stating that the combination of terrain, weather, and the need for absolute precision made any approach attempt too dangerous to justify. Captain Mitchell, still recovering from his own failed mission earlier in the day, studied the preliminary assessment reports with growing apprehension. The crash site was located in a narrow canyon that would require helicopter operations in confined spaces, with minimal room for error and weather conditions that were already beyond what his sophisticated aircraft could safely handle. The thermal imaging equipment that had failed during the earlier search would be useless for assessing the children's condition, while the computerized flight systems that normally provided safety margins would actually limit his ability to maneuver. In the tight quarters required for any rescue attempt, the command center erupted into controlled chaos as Walsh activated the region's major emergency response protocols. Phone calls went out to every available agency: the National Guard, medical evacuation services, specialized mountain rescue teams, and civilian contractors with heavy lift capability. But each conversation ended with the same frustrating conclusion. The combination of weather, terrain, and the precarious position of the school bus made immediate rescue impossible using conventional methods. Dr. Sarah Chen, the region's emergency medical coordinator, arrived at the command center within 30 minutes of the initial call. Her assessment of the medical situation was grimmer than anyone had wanted to hear. Based on the fragmentary radio transmissions from the bus driver before communication was lost, at least 6 children appeared to have sustained serious injuries in the crash, including possible spinal trauma and internal bleeding that would require immediate medical attention. "We're looking at a golden hour situation," Dr. Chen explained to the assembled emergency personnel, referring to the critical first hour after traumatic injury when immediate medical intervention could mean the difference between life and death. "Those children need to be evacuated to a trauma center within the next 2 hours, or we're going to start losing them." The time pressure added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Even if weather conditions improved dramatically, which meteorologists said was unlikely for at least 6 hours, conventional rescue methods would take too long to organize and execute. Ground teams would need hours to reach the crash site, if they could reach it at all, while heavy lift helicopters from other agencies would require time to transit to the area and then face the same operational limitations that had already defeated local aircraft. Lieutenant Ross, who had been analyzing topographical data of the crash site, looked up from his computer terminal with obvious frustration. "The approach corridors are all wrong for our aircraft," he reported. "The canyon is too narrow for safe rotor clearance, and the winds are creating downdrafts that would slam us into the canyon walls." Lieutenant Cooper nodded in agreement, having reached similar conclusions from her own analysis of the flight parameters. The EC-135's rotor diameter requires at least a 100-foot clearance zone for safe operations, but the crash site has maybe 60 feet of usable space. And that's assuming perfect conditions, which we definitely don't have. The systematic analysis that had seemed so thorough during training exercises was revealing fundamental limitations when applied to real-world emergency scenarios. The sophisticated aircraft that represented the pinnacle of rescue technology were designed for operations in open areas with adequate maneuvering room, not the kind of confined spaces and challenging conditions that characterized actual mountain emergencies. Major Patricia Hoffman from the Oregon National Guard arrived at the command center at 4:45 p.m., having driven through increasingly treacherous conditions to assess whether military resources could provide solutions that civilian agencies couldn't offer. Her evaluation was thorough but ultimately pessimistic. The Guard's heavy-lift helicopters were even larger than the Coast Guard's modern aircraft, making them completely unsuitable for operations in confined spaces, while their specialized equipment wasn't designed for the kind of precision rescue work needed to extract injured children from an unstable vehicle. "We can provide logistical support and medical evacuation once you get them out," Major Hoffman explained, "but our birds are too big for the primary rescue. You need something small and maneuverable that can work in tight quarters." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on anyone in the command center. The organization had spent millions of dollars modernizing its fleet with sophisticated aircraft that couldn't handle the very emergency scenario they now faced. The emphasis on technological advancement had created capabilities that were impressive in ideal conditions, but inadequate when confronted with the harsh realities of mountain rescue operations. Fire Chief Robert Martinez from Clearwater arrived with his technical rescue team, but his assessment of ground-based options was equally discouraging. The terrain between the road and the crash site included unstable rock formations and steep slopes that would be treacherous even under perfect conditions. With the current weather creating ice and snow accumulation, any attempt to reach the bus on foot would likely result in additional casualties among the rescue personnel. "We could try to rappel down from above," Chief Martinez suggested, "but it would take hours to position our teams, and we'd have no way to evacuate the injured children except by carrying them up the cliff face. With potential spinal injuries, that kind of transport could be fatal." The medical timeline was becoming increasingly critical as Dr. Chun calculated the deteriorating condition of the trapped children. Based on the injury reports from the bus driver's final transmission, several children were showing signs of shock and internal bleeding that would worsen rapidly without immediate intervention. The golden hour was already half over, and no viable rescue plan had emerged from all the technological sophistication and interagency coordination that was supposed to ensure effective emergency response. Lieutenant Commander Walsh found herself facing the kind of command decision that no amount of training could fully prepare anyone for. Every conventional option had been exhausted. Every sophisticated system had reached its operational limits, and 26 children were running out of time while the storm continued to worsen. The systematic approach to emergency management that had seemed so comprehensive was revealing critical gaps when confronted with scenarios that fell outside the parameters of modern equipment and established procedures. The radio chatter from various agencies created a constant background of frustrated communications as teams across the region reported their inability to reach the crash site or operate effectively in the deteriorating conditions. State police units were being forced off mountain roads as visibility dropped to zero, while medical evacuation helicopters from distant cities were grounded by weather that showed no signs of improving. At 5:30 p.m., nearly 2 hours after the initial emergency call, a weak radio transmission cut through the static from the crash site. The bus driver, injured but conscious, managed to provide a brief update on the children's condition that sent a chill through everyone listening. 3 children had lost consciousness, several others were showing signs of severe hypothermia, and the bus was making ominous creaking sounds that suggested the trees holding it in place were beginning to give way under the vehicle's weight. "We're running out of time," the driver's weak voice reported before the transmission cut out again. "I don't think we can hold on much longer." The stark reality of the situation crystallized in that moment. All the sophisticated technology, systematic procedures, and interagency coordination couldn't overcome the fundamental limitations that prevented conventional rescue methods from reaching the trapped children. The storm that had surprised meteorologists was exceeding every prediction, while the terrain that looked manageable on computer screens was proving impossible to navigate in actual conditions. Dr. Chian's medical assessment became even more urgent as she calculated the effects of cold exposure on injured children. "Hypothermia is going to compound their injuries," she warned. "We're looking at a cascading medical emergency where delays aren't just inconvenient, they're lethal." The command center fell into an uncomfortable silence as everyone present processed the magnitude of the challenge they faced. 26 children were trapped in conditions that had defeated every conventional rescue method, while time ran out and weather conditions continued to worsen. The technological solutions that had promised to revolutionize emergency response were proving inadequate when confronted with the kind of scenario that required capabilities beyond the parameters of modern systems and established procedures. Outside the operations building, the storm continued to intensify with a ferocity that seemed to mock human attempts to control and predict natural forces. The Weather Service had upgraded their warnings to blizzard conditions with wind gusts exceeding 70 miles per hour, while visibility had dropped to the point where even ground vehicles were becoming stranded on roads that had been passable. Just hours earlier, the crisis had evolved beyond a routine emergency into a catastrophic situation that would test not just the limits of rescue technology, but the fundamental assumptions about what constituted effective emergency response capability. In an era that had embraced sophistication over proven reliability, somewhere in the mountains, 26 children were depending on solutions that conventional wisdom said didn't exist. Rebecca Harrison had been listening to the radio traffic for over 2 hours, her weathered hands gripping a coffee cup that had long since gone cold as she absorbed every detail of the deteriorating situation. From her position in the hangar, she could hear the frustration mounting in the voices of pilots and coordinators who were running out of options while 26 children faced increasingly desperate circumstances in the mountains. Staff Sergeant Bradley emerged from behind the Huey, his coveralls stained with hydraulic fluid from the maintenance work he'd been completing while monitoring the emergency communications. At 57, he had witnessed enough rescue operations to understand when conventional approaches were failing, and his expression reflected the same grim assessment that Rebecca had reached about the limitations of modern equipment in the current crisis. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" Bradley said quietly, his voice barely audible over the wind that was rattling the hangar doors. He knew Rebecca well enough to recognize the signs when she was calculating flight parameters and risk assessments in her head. The same focused concentration she displayed before some of her most challenging rescues in Afghanistan. Rebecca set down her coffee cup and moved toward the Huey's cockpit, running her hands along the aircraft's battle-tested frame as she considered the implications of what she was contemplating. The helicopter had been designed during an era when missions were expected to succeed regardless of conditions, when equipment failure wasn't an acceptable excuse for leaving people to die. Its twin-engine configuration provided redundancy that single-engine aircraft couldn't match, while its robust construction had been proven in combat operations that made civilian rescue work seem routine by comparison. "The canyon they're talking about," Rebecca said finally, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had flown similar terrain countless times. "I know that area. Flew training missions there back in '08 before they changed the regulations. Huey can get in there." Bradley nodded, having expected this moment since the emergency began. He had watched Rebecca study topographical maps of the region for years, analyzing approach routes and landing zones with the systematic thoroughness of a pilot who understood that preparation could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her knowledge of local terrain exceeded that of any other pilot on the base, but her expertise had been dismissed as irrelevant by administrators who preferred computer-generated flight plans over experience-based navigation. Radio crackled with another transmission from the crash site, the bus driver's weakening voice reporting that 2 more children had lost consciousness and that the vehicle was shifting ominously as the trees holding it in place began to give way under the combined stress of wind and weight. Time was running out faster than anyone had anticipated, while the sophisticated rescue systems that were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of crisis continued to prove inadequate for the challenging conditions. "They'll court-martial you," Bradley warned, though his tone suggested he understood why Rebecca was willing to accept that risk. "Walsh will have no choice but to throw the book at you for launching without authorization." Rebecca began her pre-flight inspection with movements that were automatic after 20 years of flying, her hands checking systems and controls that she knew as intimately as her own heartbeat. The Huey's analog instruments and mechanical systems represented a different philosophy of aviation, one that prioritized pilot skill and aircraft reliability over technological sophistication and computerized safety features. 26 kids. "Tom," she replied, testing the flight controls and monitoring the engine parameters that would determine whether the aging helicopter could handle the demanding mission ahead. "If I don't try, they're going to die while we stand around talking about why it's impossible." The decision crystallized in that moment, the kind of career-defining choice that separated pilots who followed orders from those who understood that some situations required actions that transcended institutional policies and established procedures. Rebecca had faced similar moments in combat zones, where saving lives meant ignoring regulations that hadn't been written with life or death situations in mind. Bradley moved to the hangar doors, preparing to open them for an unauthorized departure. That would likely end Rebecca's career, but might save the lives of children who had no other hope for rescue. His actions represented the kind of quiet support that characterized the relationship between experienced personnel who understood that institutional loyalty sometimes had to be subordinated to moral imperatives. "Fuel's topped off, medical kit is loaded, and I installed those new cable assemblies yesterday," Bradley reported, his voice carrying professional pride despite the unauthorized nature of what they were about to attempt. "She's as ready as I can make her." Rebecca strapped herself into the pilot's seat, her faded uniform a stark contrast to the high-tech flight suits worn by the younger pilots whose sophisticated aircraft had been defeated by conditions that the Huey had been designed to handle. The worn fabric and outdated insignia represented capabilities that had been dismissed as obsolete, but were about to prove their worth in ways that no computer simulation could have predicted. The startup sequence proceeded with mechanical precision, the Huey's twin-turbine engines winding up with the distinctive sound that had provided comfort to countless soldiers and civilians over the aircraft's decades of service. The helicopter's systems came online without the computer-assisted checks and automated safety features that characterized modern aircraft, relying instead on pilot knowledge and mechanical reliability that had been proven in conditions far more challenging than anything civilian rescue operations typically encountered. As the rotor system reached operating speed, Rebecca felt the familiar vibration that told her the aircraft was ready for flight. The Huey responded to her touch like a well-trained horse, its controls requiring the kind of physical input and constant attention that modern pilots found exhausting, but that experienced aviators understood was essential for precision flying. In challenging conditions. Cascade Base. This is Huey 29 requesting immediate departure for emergency rescue operations. Rebecca transmitted, knowing that her unauthorized request would trigger instant opposition from the command center where conventional thinking had declared the mission impossible. The response was immediate and predictably hostile. Huey 29, you are not authorized for rescue operations. Return to your hangar immediately and stand by for disciplinary action. Rebecca ignored the transmission and lifted the helicopter from the hangar floor, its older rotor system allowing her to clear the building with minimal ground effect and transition immediately into forward flight. The difference between the Huey's capabilities and those of modern aircraft became apparent as soon as she encountered the mountain winds that had defeated the EC-135 earlier in the day. Where the sophisticated helicopter had been overwhelmed by turbulence and forced to fight its computerized safety systems. The older aircraft slipped through the chaotic air currents with the kind of stability that came from being designed for operations in hostile environments. The Huey's weight and mechanical simplicity allowed it to absorb punishment that would have triggered multiple warning systems in more advanced aircraft. All stations, this is Lieutenant Commander Walsh, came the angry voice over the radio. Huey 29 is conducting unauthorized operations and is ordered to return to base immediately. Do not provide assistance or coordination for this rogue mission. Rebecca switched to the emergency frequency used by civilian agencies, knowing that her actions were burning bridges with her own organization, but hoping that other rescue personnel would understand the necessity of what she was attempting. The response from civilian coordinators was immediate and supportive, their voices carrying relief that someone was finally attempting to reach the trapped children. Huey 29, this is Clearwater Emergency Services, came the voice of Fire Chief Martinez. We have been monitoring your departure and want you to know that ground teams are standing by to provide whatever support you need. Those kids are running out of time. The flight toward the crash site took Rebecca through terrain that she had studied extensively, but never flown under such challenging conditions. The storm system was continuing to intensify beyond all predictions, with wind speeds that would have grounded any sensible pilot and visibility that required navigation by instruments and intuition rather than visual reference to landmarks. But the Huey had been designed for exactly these conditions, built during an era when military operations were expected to continue regardless of weather and when aircraft reliability was measured by the ability to complete missions that other helicopters couldn't attempt. The twin-engine configuration provided redundancy that allowed continued flight even if one power plant failed, while the robust construction absorbed the punishment of severe turbulence without triggering the kinds of system failures that plagued more complex aircraft. As she approached the canyon where the school bus was trapped, Rebecca could see why the modern rescue helicopters had been unable to reach the crash site. The terrain was indeed confined and challenging, with rock walls that rose on either side of a narrow valley barely wide enough for safe rotor clearance. But her experience in similar environments had taught her to read the subtle wind patterns and terrain features that could provide safe passage through apparently impossible conditions. The Huey's smaller rotor diameter compared to larger rescue helicopters gave her additional margins in the confined space, while the aircraft's mechanical simplicity meant fewer systems that could fail under the stress of precision flying in turbulent conditions. Most importantly, her own experience in combat zones had prepared her for the kind of split-second decision-making and intuitive flying that the current situation demanded. I have visual contact with the crash site, Rebecca transmitted to the civilian coordinators who were monitoring her unauthorized rescue attempt. "The bus is indeed in a precarious position, but I believe extraction is possible using winch operations." The response from the command center was immediate and furious, with Lieutenant Commander Walsh ordering her to abort the mission and return to base for immediate disciplinary action. But Rebecca was already committed to the rescue attempt. Her aircraft positioned above the crash site in a hover that required every ounce of her skill to maintain in the chaotic wind conditions below her. She could see the school bus wedged against the grove of trees that was preventing it from sliding into the ravine beyond. The vehicle was indeed unstable, shifting visibly with each gust of wind, but her assessment suggested that careful winch operations could extract the children without triggering the catastrophic slide that everyone feared. The radio crackled with transmissions from multiple agencies as word spread that someone was finally attempting to reach the trapped children. Medical teams prepared to receive casualties. Ground units positioned themselves to provide support, and civilian coordinators held their breath as they watched an unauthorized rescue mission that represented the only hope for 26 young lives. "Beginning extraction operations," Rebecca announced, lowering the rescue winch toward the bus while fighting to maintain precise position in conditions that would have overwhelmed less experienced pilots. The Huey responded to her touch with the kind of reliability that had made it legendary among aviators who understood the difference between technological sophistication and proven capability. The first child to be extracted was an 8-year-old girl who had remained conscious throughout the ordeal, her small form rising through the storm toward safety as Rebecca demonstrated the kind of precision flying that her critics had dismissed as obsolete. But precision flying, it turned out, was exactly what the situation required, and the aging helicopter was proving that sometimes the oldest solutions were the most effective ones. As the rescue continued, with each successful extraction defying the predictions of experts who had declared the mission impossible, Rebecca understood that she was doing more than saving children's lives. She was proving that institutional prejudice against older equipment and experienced personnel could have deadly consequences, and that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the one who sees the solution to an apparently impossible problem. The first child reached the Huey's cabin after what felt like an eternity, but was actually only 90 seconds of precise winch operation through wind conditions that would have been impossible for larger aircraft to handle. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez, conscious but suffering from exposure and a possible broken arm, was secured in the helicopter's medical compartment by the emergency medical technician that Rebecca had requested be positioned at the landing zone. Below, "Child secured, vital signs stable," came the report from EMTA Patricia Williams, whose voice carried both relief and amazement at what she was witnessing. Williams had been working mountain rescues for 15 years and had never seen helicopter operations conducted in such challenging conditions, let alone in the confined space of the canyon where the school bus remained precariously balanced. Rebecca maintained her hover with the kind of steady precision that separated exceptional pilots from merely competent ones, her hands making constant micro-adjustments to compensate for wind gusts that would have sent other aircraft careening into the canyon walls. The Huey's mechanical flight controls provided direct feedback that allowed her to feel every change in atmospheric conditions, enabling split-second corrections that computerized systems couldn't match. The radio traffic from the command center had shifted from angry demands for mission abort to grudging monitoring of an operation that was succeeding despite all official predictions of failure. Lieutenant Commander Walsh found herself in the uncomfortable position of watching her organization's most dismissed pilot accomplish what her most advanced aircraft couldn't attempt, while medical coordinators prepared to receive casualties that conventional wisdom said couldn't be extracted. "Second extraction beginning," Rebecca announced as she lowered the winch toward the bus again, this time retrieving a 10-year-old boy who had suffered a head injury during the crash. The child's unconscious state made the extraction more challenging, requiring careful coordination with the bus driver, who was fighting his own injuries to help secure each child in the rescue harness. Dr. Sarah Chun monitored the medical aspects of the rescue from the command center, her initial skepticism about the unauthorized mission giving way to professional appreciation for what Rebecca was accomplishing under impossible conditions. The children being extracted were receiving immediate medical attention that would have been delayed by hours if conventional rescue methods had been attempted, making the difference between life and death for several of the most seriously injured victims. Captain Mitchell watched the rescue operations unfold from the base, his own professional pride struggling with the reality that the pilot everyone had dismissed was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything he had been trained to accomplish. The systematic approach to aviation that had defined his career was being challenged by someone whose methods appeared chaotic but were achieving results that textbook procedures couldn't match. How is she maintaining a stable hover in those wind conditions? Mitchell asked Lieutenant Ross, his voice carrying genuine bewilderment at what he was witnessing through the command center's monitoring systems. Ross studied the flight data being transmitted from Rebecca's aircraft, comparing it to the conditions that had forced their own mission aboard hours earlier. She's using the canyon walls to create wind shadows, he realized, his training finally allowing him to understand techniques that hadn't been covered in modern flight instruction. And the Huey's weight is actually working in her favor. It's not getting bounced around like our bird would be. The third extraction brought up a 12-year-old girl who had been trapped beneath an overturned seat, her rescue requiring coordination between Rebecca and the injured bus driver who was demonstrating remarkable courage despite his own deteriorating condition. The precision required to position the winch cable in exactly the right location while maintaining hover in chaotic wind conditions was beyond what most pilots could accomplish, but Rebecca's combat experience had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenging operation. Fire Chief Martinez coordinated ground operations from a position as close to the crash site as his teams could safely approach, providing real-time assessment of the bus's stability and the children's condition. "The vehicle is holding position," he reported, "but we can see stress fractures developing in the trees. Each extraction cycle is putting additional strain on whatever's keeping that bus from going over the edge." The race against time was becoming more critical with each successful rescue. While Rebecca's skills were proving adequate for the extraction operations, the mechanical stress of the hovering helicopter and the repeated winch cycles were contributing to the instability of the school bus's precarious position. The trees that had initially saved the children's lives were gradually weakening under forces they had never been designed to withstand. Major Patricia Hoffman from the Oregon National Guard arrived at the crash site perimeter, having driven through increasingly dangerous conditions to witness an operation that was redefining her understanding of what constituted effective rescue capability. Her own organization's heavy-lift helicopters remained grounded by weather that the supposedly obsolete Huey was handling with apparent ease. "Request permission to position our medical teams closer to the extraction zone," Major Hoffman radioed to the civilian coordinators who had assumed operational control of the rescue effort. "We can provide immediate trauma care that might save lives during transport to the hospital." The coordination between multiple agencies was proceeding more smoothly than anyone had expected, largely because Rebecca's unauthorized mission had bypassed the bureaucratic processes that often complicated emergency response operations. Civilian fire departments, medical services, and even military units were working together with the kind of efficiency that formal interagency protocols rarely achieved. By the time Rebecca had extracted 8 children, the true scope of her accomplishment was becoming clear to everyone monitoring the operation. Not only was she succeeding where modern aircraft had failed, but she was doing so while maintaining the kind of safety margins that kept both herself and the rescued children out of additional danger. The precision and consistency of her flying was revealing capabilities that institutional prejudice had prevented anyone from recognizing. Lieutenant Cooper, monitoring the mission from the command center, found herself revising fundamental assumptions about aircraft capability and pilot effectiveness. The extraction rate is actually faster than our training scenarios predicted. For ideal conditions, she observed, her voice carrying newfound respect for methods she had previously dismissed as outdated. Dr. Chen's medical assessments of the extracted children were confirming the life-saving importance of Rebecca's unauthorized mission. 3 of the children we've received so far were in critical condition, she reported. If they had remained trapped for even another hour, we probably would have lost them to hypothermia and internal bleeding. The bus driver's radio transmissions were becoming weaker as his own injuries took their toll, but his updates on the remaining children's condition provided crucial information for prioritizing the extraction sequence. Several children remained unconscious while others were showing signs of shock that would require immediate medical intervention once they reached the helicopter. Huey 29, this is Cascade Base, came Lieutenant Commander Walsh's voice, her tone having shifted from angry opposition to reluctant coordination. We're tracking your progress and want you to know that medical teams are standing by at the hospital. What do you need from us? It was the first official acknowledgement that Rebecca's mission was not only succeeding, but was receiving institutional support despite its unauthorized nature. The question represented a fundamental shift in perspective from viewing her actions as insubordination to recognizing them as the only effective response to an emergency that had defeated conventional approaches. Base, I need clear medical coordination for the remaining 18 children, Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite the physical demands of maintaining precise hover control for over an hour. Some of them are in critical condition and will need immediate trauma care. The 9th and 10th extractions proceeded smoothly, bringing up 2 boys who had been protecting a younger girl throughout the ordeal. Their rescue revealed the kind of courage and selflessness that adults often underestimated in children, while demonstrating the importance of speed in preventing further deterioration of the group's condition. Staff Sergeant Bradley monitored the mission from the base, tracking fuel consumption and mechanical parameters that would determine how long Rebecca could continue the rescue operations. The Huey's endurance was proven superior to modern aircraft that required more fuel to maintain hover operations, while its mechanical simplicity meant fewer systems that could fail under the stress of extended operations. She's got enough fuel for at least another 2 hours of operations, Bradley reported to anyone who would listen, his voice carrying pride in both the pilot and the aircraft that everyone had written off as obsolete. That bird was built to work, and she's proving it today. The 11th through 15th extractions revealed the full extent of injuries among the children, with several requiring immediate medical intervention that was only possible because of the speed with which Rebecca was conducting the rescue operations. The golden hour that Dr. Chun had identified as critical was being maximized by efficiency that conventional rescue methods couldn't have achieved. Captain Mitchell found himself studying Rebecca's flight techniques with the focused attention of someone learning lessons that weren't covered in modern training programs. She's reading the wind patterns like a topographical map, he observed Lieutenant Ross. I've never seen anyone fly with that kind of situational awareness. The 16th extraction brought up the bus driver himself, whose condition had deteriorated to the point where he could no longer assist with securing the children in rescue harnesses. His evacuation meant that Rebecca would have to complete the remaining rescues without ground coordination, requiring even more precise positioning and timing than the already challenging operations had demanded. Driver is conscious but weak, reported Empt Williams as the injured man was secured in the medical compartment. Multiple fractures and possible internal bleeding, but he's stable for transport. With 10 children still trapped in the increasingly unstable bus, Rebecca faced the most challenging phase of the rescue operation. The vehicle was showing signs of shifting more frequently, while the trees holding it in place were displaying stress fractures that suggested catastrophic failure could occur at any moment. The race against time was intensifying just as the rescue operations were becoming more difficult. The 17th child extracted was a girl who had been trapped beneath debris from the crash, her rescue requiring Rebecca to position the winch cable with millimeter precision while maintaining hover in wind conditions that continued to challenge even her exceptional skills. The success of the operation was testament to capabilities that institutional thinking had dismissed as irrelevant to modern rescue operations. Huey 29. Be advised that our structural engineers are reporting critical stress levels in the trees. Supporting the bus came the voice of Fire Chief Martinez. You may have only minutes before the vehicle becomes completely unstable. The warning added urgency to operations that were already pushing the limits of what any pilot could accomplish. Rebecca had extracted 17 children in conditions that had defeated every conventional rescue method. But the most dangerous phase of the mission was still ahead as she raced to save the final 9 children before the school bus completed its slide into the ravine below. The 18th extraction would prove to be the most harrowing of the entire operation. As Rebecca lowered the winch cable toward the school bus, a massive gust of wind caught the Huey and slammed it sideways toward the canyon wall. Only her lightning-fast reflexes and 20 years of combat flying experience prevented a catastrophic collision. As she pulled maximum power and fought the controls to regain position above the increasingly unstable vehicle, the stress of the maneuver caused one of the support trees to crack audibly, the sharp sound echoing through the canyon like a gunshot. The school bus shifted several feet closer to the edge of the ravine, its rear wheels now hanging partially over empty space, while the remaining trees groaned under the strain of supporting the vehicle's full weight on an increasingly unstable foundation. Tree failure imminent, Fire Chief Martinez reported from his observation position, his voice tight with tension as he watched the rescue operation teetering on the edge of disaster. Structural analysis indicates complete collapse within the next 5 to 10 minutes. Rebecca had 9 children left to extract in a time frame that would challenge even perfect conditions, while working with a vehicle that could plummet into the ravine at any moment. The mathematical impossibility of the situation would have defeated any reasonable rescue plan. But Rebecca's combat experience had taught her that impossible situations sometimes required solutions that transcended normal operational parameters. I'm going to have to take multiple children per lift, she announced over the radio, a decision that violated every safety protocol for helicopter rescue operations but represented the only possibility for saving the remaining trapped students. Dr. Sarah Chun immediately understood the implications of Rebecca's decision. Captain, that's beyond the rated capacity of your winch system, and puts everyone at additional risk if something goes wrong during the lift. Doctor, if I don't try it, those kids are going to die anyway when the bus goes over the edge, Rebecca replied, her voice carrying the quiet determination of someone who had faced similar life or death decisions in combat zones. Were following regulations meant accepting unnecessary casualties. The 19th and 20th extractions proceeded as a coordinated double lift, with Rebecca positioning 2 children in specially rigged harnesses that allowed the Huey's winch system to handle the additional weight. The operation required precision that pushed both pilot and equipment beyond designed limits, but the alternative was leaving children to die while adhering to safety margins that hadn't been calculated for catastrophic emergency scenarios. Lieutenant Commander Walsh watched the double extraction from the command center, her understanding of helicopter operations telling her that what Rebecca was attempting should be impossible with the equipment she was using. How was a 30-year-old winch system handling loads that would challenge our modern equipment? She asked the maintenance specialists monitoring the operation. Staff Sergeant Bradley's voice came over the radio with obvious pride in the aircraft he had maintained for years. "Ma'am, that Huey was built when they designed equipment to work under any conditions, not just optimal ones. The winch system has triple the safety margins of modern lightweight units." The bus shifted again as the 21st child was lifted to safety. The movement more pronounced this time as the remaining support tree began to lean at an angle that indicated imminent failure. Rebecca could see cracks spreading through the trunk, while the vehicle's position had become so precarious that even the vibration from her rotor system was contributing to its instability. 8 children remained trapped in the school bus that was literally hanging over the edge of disaster, while the pilot everyone had dismissed as obsolete raced against physics and time to complete an impossible rescue. The margin for error had been eliminated entirely, leaving only skill, determination, and equipment that had been designed to function when everything else failed. The 22nd and 23rd extractions came up together in another double lift that stressed the Huey's systems to their absolute limits. Rebecca could feel the helicopter struggling with the additional weight and the challenging flight conditions, but the robust construction that had made the aircraft legendary in combat operations was proving adequate for demands that would have destroyed more sophisticated equipment. 6 children remaining, Rebecca reported, her voice steady despite the fact that she was now operating in conditions that no training manual had ever contemplated. The mathematical certainty of the tree's collapse meant that she had perhaps 3 more extraction cycles before the school bus completed its slide into the ravine below. Major Patricia Hoffman coordinated ground support operations from the nearest safe position, watching an exhibition of pilot skill that was redefining her understanding of what constituted effective rescue capability. "I've seen combat pilots in Afghanistan who couldn't do what she's doing," she reported to her National Guard superiors. "This is beyond exceptional. It's unprecedented." The 24th extraction brought up a girl who had been unconscious throughout most of the ordeal, her limp form requiring careful handling that made the winch operation even more challenging. Rebecca's experience with medical evacuations in combat zones provided the expertise needed to ensure the child's safety during the lift, while her flying skills kept the helicopter stable despite wind conditions that continued to buffet the aircraft. As the 25th child rose toward safety, the support tree reached its breaking point. The trunk split with a sound like thunder, causing the school bus to lurch forward several more feet until only the final tree stood between 26 children and certain death in the ravine below. The last remaining support was visibly bending under the vehicle's weight, its failure now a matter of minutes rather than hours. 1 child remained in the bus, a 10-year-old boy who had been trapped beneath debris from the initial crash and was showing signs of serious injuries that would require immediate medical attention. The mathematical impossibility of reaching him before the final tree failed would have forced any reasonable rescue operation to accept the loss. But Rebecca's combat experience had taught her that some battles could only be won by refusing to accept defeat. "Final extraction beginning," she announced, lowering the winch cable toward the school bus for the last while the entire rescue operation held its breath. The boy below was conscious but weak, struggling to secure himself in the rescue harness while the vehicle beneath him shifted ominously with each gust of wind. The final tree began to lean more dramatically, its trunk showing stress fractures that indicated complete failure within moments. Rebecca maintained her hover with absolute precision, knowing that the slightest mistake would send both the remaining child and herself into the ravine below. The margin for error had been eliminated entirely, leaving only the kind of flying that separated legendary pilots from merely competent ones. As the 26th child was lifted clear of the school bus, the final support tree gave way with a crack that echoed through the canyon like an explosion. The empty vehicle tumbled end over end into the ravine, disappearing into the storm and darkness below while the last child rose safely toward the Huey's cabin. The rescue was complete with literally seconds to spare, accomplished through flying skills that institutional prejudice had dismissed as obsolete. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the Huey's rotors as Rebecca began the flight back to base with the final group of rescued children. In the command center, personnel who had spent the day watching their most advanced systems fail were processing the reality that their most dismissed pilot had accomplished what everyone had declared impossible. All 26 children extracted successfully, Rebecca reported, her voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of someone who had proven that sometimes the person everyone overlooks is exactly the one who sees the solution to an apparently impossible problem. Lieutenant Commander Walsh found herself facing a complete reevaluation of everything she thought she knew about effective rescue operations. "Captain Harrison," she transmitted, her voice carrying a respect that had been absent from their previous communications, "return to base for medical coordination and debriefing." The flight back to Cascade Valley Regional Airport took Rebecca through weather conditions that were still challenging, but seemed almost routine after the precision flying she had just completed. Behind her, 26 children were alive because she had refused to accept institutional limitations on what constituted possible rescue operations. Dr. Chun coordinated the medical reception of the rescued children, her assessment confirming that Rebecca's rapid extraction had saved lives that conventional rescue methods would have lost to hypothermia and trauma complications. Multiple children were within minutes of life-threatening medical crises, she reported. The speed of this rescue operation made the difference between survival and tragedy. As the Huey touched down at the base, Rebecca was greeted not by the disciplinary action she had expected, but by personnel from every agency involved in the rescue operation. The transformation in institutional attitude was immediate and profound, as everyone present understood they had witnessed capabilities that had been dismissed as obsolete, proving themselves superior to modern alternatives. Captain Mitchell was among the first to approach Rebecca as she shut down the aircraft, his expression carrying professional respect that had replaced the dismissive attitude he had shown just hours earlier. "Captain, I owe you an apology," he said simply. "What you accomplished today was beyond anything I was trained to attempt." The debriefing that followed became less an investigation of unauthorized actions than a comprehensive analysis of what had made the rescue possible when conventional methods had failed. Rebecca's combat experience, intimate knowledge of local terrain, and mastery of aircraft that had been designed for challenging conditions had combined to create capabilities that sophisticated technology couldn't replicate. Staff Sergeant Bradley emerged from the hangar where he had been monitoring the mission, his face showing the pride of someone whose faith in proven equipment had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. 26 for 26, he said quietly, referring to the perfect record of successful extractions. Not bad for a museum piece. The institutional changes that followed were swift and comprehensive. Within weeks, Rebecca found herself promoted to Chief of Mountain Rescue Operations, with authority to develop training programs that emphasized pilot skill and aircraft versatility over technological sophistication. The Huey that everyone had planned to decommission became the centerpiece of a new rescue philosophy that valued proven capability over impressive specifications. Lieutenant Commander Walsh, to her credit, embraced the lessons learned from the rescue operation and became one of Rebecca's strongest supporters in implementing changes that balanced technological advancement with traditional aviation skills. "We learned that progress isn't always about replacing older methods," she acknowledged. "Sometimes it's about understanding when those methods remain the best solutions." The faded uniform that had marked Rebecca as outdated became a symbol of experience and competence that couldn't be replaced by modern equipment. Training programs were redesigned to include the kind of challenging scenarios that revealed the difference between simulation-based instruction and real-world expertise. developed through years of difficult flying. 6 months later, Rebecca stood before an audience of rescue personnel from across the country, sharing lessons learned from an operation that had redefined institutional thinking about effective emergency response. The Huey sat outside the auditorium, now bearing special markings that designated it as the lead aircraft for the mountain rescue program that had evolved from her unauthorized mission. Remember, Rebecca concluded her presentation to thunderous applause, the equipment and people that institutions overlook are often exactly what's needed when everything else fails. Don't let prejudice against older methods prevent you from using the best tools for the job. The transformation was complete. What had begun as institutional dismissal of outdated capabilities had evolved into recognition that true effectiveness came from matching the right resources to specific challenges, regardless of how those resources appeared to people who had never needed them. The pilot in the faded uniform had proven that sometimes the most valuable assets are the ones everyone takes for granted, until the moment when they become the difference between success and failure, between life and death. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.